Welcome to Revolution Chronicles, where forgotten history comes alive before we begin. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story now. Let's uncover the hidden truth of the Virgin Queen, a secret that lay buried for more than 400 years. In the quiet corridors of history, there are whispers that have never fully faded, voices from centuries past that seem to call out to us even now, tugging at our imagination with secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Among those voices, none has echoed louder or longer than that of Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen of England, the woman who ruled a divided kingdom with a hand both firm and cautious, a woman who became larger than life, even as the truth of her life was buried deeper than the public ever knew for more than 400 years. Elizabeth has been remembered as a monarch who sacrificed everything for her throne. She denied marriage. She refused to bear children. She claimed her body belonged not to any man, but to England itself. She fashioned herself into a symbol, a queen above the reach of ordinary passions, yet beneath that image, carefully painted and fiercely defended, lay a truth she could never share, a truth that, if revealed in her own time, might have destroyed her crown, her dynasty, and the fragile peace she had built. From the ashes of war, imagine the world Elizabeth inherited. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, a child born in scandal. Her mother was executed when Elizabeth was only 2 years old, condemned as a traitor and accused of dark crimes against the king. The child Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, stripped of her royal title, and thrust into the shadows of court politics. She grew up never knowing whether she would rise to the throne or meet the same fate as her mother. The court was a place of shifting loyalties, daggers behind every smile, and Elizabeth learned early how to guard her heart behind walls of silence and watchfulness. When her half-sister Mary Tudor took the throne, Elizabeth's life grew even more dangerous. Mary was a devout Catholic who despised Elizabeth's Protestant faith and suspected her of treachery. At one point, Elizabeth was locked away in the Tower of London, her fate hanging by a thread. She emerged only by luck and the fear that executing her would spark rebellion. Yet, even in those dark days, Elizabeth was learning. She was watching how power worked, how men schemed, and how queens could be undone by the secrets of their own bodies. For Mary's failure to bear a child, her phantom pregnancies, her swollen belly that never produced an heir, would become her downfall. Elizabeth saw it with her own eyes. A woman's body turned into a weapon used by enemies to prove weakness and stir unrest. When Elizabeth finally ascended the throne in 1558, she was 25 years old and very much aware that her unmarried state would become both her greatest strength and her most dangerous liability. Every ambassador asked the same question: who would she marry? Which prince or king would take her hand and with it take control of England? Elizabeth played the game brilliantly. She entertained offers from kings, dukes, and courtiers, always letting each side believe they had a chance, but she never allowed herself to be trapped. Her refusal to wed became her legend. She was the Virgin Queen, the bride of the nation. But as her reign lengthened, the whispers grew louder. Could it be true that Elizabeth had never taken a lover? Was she truly untouched? Or was there a darker secret hidden behind the walls of her palaces? The court was alive with rumor. Sir Robert Dudley, her childhood friend and constant companion, was said to share a closeness with her that went beyond friendship. They rode together, laughed together, spent long hours alone in her chambers. Even foreign ambassadors wrote letters home, hinting that the queen and her favorite were bound by more than men politics. Yet nothing was ever proven, and Elizabeth denied it all with fiery words. But what if behind those denials there was something else, something greater than a scandal of the flesh? What if the truth was that Elizabeth had lived her life guarding not her chastity, but a hidden truth about her very identity? For centuries, historians and writers have debated a claim whispered in country taverns and passed down in the dusty margins of forgotten books. The claim that Elizabeth the Virgin Queen was not the woman she appeared to be, but someone else entirely, an impostor, a carefully crafted deception born from the chaos of her youth. According to this legend, the real Elizabeth Tudor died as a child in the village of Bisley, where she had been sent away during a time of plague, fearing the wrath of her father, King Henry VIII. The servants and guardians of the young princess hatched a desperate plan. They found a local child who bore a striking resemblance, a child who could take Elizabeth's place and save them all from the king's vengeance. The only problem was that the child chosen was not a girl, but a boy. Sounds like madness, a tale too wild to be true, and yet the legend persisted, whispered for generations. The so-called Bisley Boy theory claimed that Elizabeth was replaced by this boy, and that he lived out his life as her ruling England with the cunning intelligence. An iron will history remembers, if true, it would explain much her refusal to marry. Her fierce defense of her virginity, her constant fear of exposure. It would cast her legend not as a choice of sacrifice, but as a prison of necessity. To understand how such a story could take root, one must look closer at Elizabeth's reign. The Queen was always cautious about her image. She controlled how portraits were painted. She censored words written about her. She built her identity as something almost sacred. She often spoke of her body as belonging to England, not to herself. She surrounded herself with symbols of purity, virginity, and eternal youth, and yet she also hid herself from scrutiny. She grew furious when asked about her health or her womanhood. She refused medical examinations. She surrounded her private life with silence and suspicion. Contemporaries remarked on her strange habits. She often wore layers of heavy makeup, wigs, and high collars covering her body from prying eyes. Her closest ladies-in-waiting remained fiercely loyal and rarely spoke of what they saw. Perhaps they knew more than history recorded. Perhaps they helped her keep a secret that could never be written down. The story of the Bisley Boy first gained attention in the 19th century, when a clergyman claimed to have discovered evidence in the village itself. He told of a local tale passed down through families of a young Elizabeth who died suddenly, and of frantic guardians who feared the king's wrath, for Henry VIII was a man of terrifying temper. He had executed wives and servants for less. If he had learned that his prized daughter was dead, those responsible might have faced the axe, and so the legend claimed they dressed a local boy in the clothes of the dead princess and passed him off as Elizabeth when the king visited. He was none the wiser, and the charade became permanent. Is a story so wild that it sounds like myth, and yet the pieces seem to fit too neatly. The Virgin Queen who never married, who never bore children, who never allowed her body to be subject to the scrutiny of husband or doctor. The queen who lived behind walls of secrecy, who ruled with brilliance, but also with fear. Always fear that the mask might slip, but whether truth or invention, the story tells us something about Elizabeth, about the world she lived in, and the image she left behind. For 400 years, she has been remembered as the monarch who gave herself wholly to her country, who turned her personal life into a public symbol. Yet behind that symbol lay a woman haunted by secrets, and whether those secrets were of the heart or of the body, we may never know. As the years of her reign stretched on, the question of succession grew more urgent. The nation pressed her to wed, to produce an heir, but she would not, or could not. She spoke, instead of being married to her people, of having no master but God. In England her courtiers grew restless. Her counselors begged her to choose. But Elizabeth held firm, perhaps knowing that to yield to marriage was to risk everything. For in marriage came scrutiny, and in scrutiny came danger, and so she played the game until her death in 1603. When her body lay cold and still, those closest to her prepared it for burial. What did they see in that final moment? Did they guard her? Secrets even then, carrying them silently to their graves. The Virgin Queen was buried with ceremony and splendor, but also with mystery. The truth of her life sealed in stone as tightly as her coffin. 4 centuries later, we are still asking, who was Elizabeth Tudor? What secret did she carry that shaped her choices and built her legend? The story of the Bisley Boy may never be proven, yet it refuses to fade. It lingers because it touches on something deeper than scandal. It touches on the fragility of power, the ways in which people build legends to survive, and the fear that behind the greatest figures of history lies a human story too complicated to reveal. And so we return to the whispers, the rumors, the secrets that have echoed for 400 years. Did Elizabeth guard her virginity as a weapon of power, or as the shield for a truth far darker and more dangerous? A truth hidden from the world, yet powerful enough to shape a nation and a legacy that endures even now. The whispers of Elizabeth's secret did not fade when her coffin was sealed in Westminster Abbey. Instead, they grew stronger, carried forward in letters, memoirs, and hushed conversations across Europe as England stepped into a new era under James. Stuart. Questions about the life and reign of the Virgin Queen lingered like shadows that refused to lift. There was admiration, yes, for she had steered her nation through storms of war and religious division, but there was also curiosity, a gnawing sense that behind her triumphs there was something she had hidden too well, something left unresolved. Elizabeth's reign had been a golden age on the surface, a time of Shakespeare and discovery, of Raleigh and Drake, of England stepping boldly onto the seas. Yet beneath the splendor lay unease, for she had ruled alone and left no heir. She had defied the expectation of her sex in a world that demanded women serve as wives and mothers. She had refused to be defined by husband or child, and in doing so, she made herself into a symbol that even now dazzles us with its defiance. But symbols often hide the cost of their making, and Elizabeth's cost was heavy. She lived a life in constant performance, every glance measured, every word chosen to guard the image she had built. She laughed when courtiers called her Gloriana. She accepted when poets wrote of her as Astrea, the Virgin goddess descended to rule on earth. But in the private chambers where no ambassador could see, there were moments of silence, moments of fear, moments where the mask must have weighed unbearably heavy. Robert Dudley remained the closest figure to her heart, a man she trusted above all others. The rumors of their love never ceased, and when his wife Amy Robsart was found dead at the bottom of a staircase in 1560, the whispers roared louder than ever. Some called it accident, others murder, and many believed Dudley had hoped to clear the path to the Queen's hand. Elizabeth faced the storm with her usual brilliance, denying nothing, admitting nothing, keeping the world guessing. But if her heart truly belonged to Dudley, why did she never marry him? Some say it was politics, that marriage to a subject would lower her stature. Others say it was fear that Dudley's ambition would threaten her throne. But there are those who believe it was something else entirely, that Elizabeth could never risk the intimacy of marriage for fear her most guarded truth would be revealed. Consider the long years when she entertained suitors, foreign princes and kings. She allowed negotiations to drag on for months, sometimes years, always careful to appear willing, yet never closing the bargain. She let portraits be painted of men she might marry, sent letters rich with promises, then turned away at the final moment. Ambassadors wrote home in frustration, calling her deceitful, a trickster. But was it deceit, or was it survival? Was it the performance of a monarch who knew that one slip could undo her throne? If she were indeed guarding a secret of the body, a truth that could never be uncovered, then marriage was not simply undesirable, it was impossible. There are records from her physicians and attendants that describe her strange ailments. Times when she fell into sudden fevers, times when her face swelled and turned pale, times when her temper flared beyond reason. In those moments, she withdrew, refusing to be seen. The court waited in silence for her recovery. She was a queen who allowed no one to probe too deeply into her health, who punished those who dared to speak of her aging body. In her later years, she covered her thinning hair with elaborate wigs, her pockmarked skin with heavy, quiet white lead makeup, her failing teeth hidden behind her tight lips. Was this merely vanity, or was it the instinct of someone who had lived a lifetime behind disguise? The Bisley Boy theory, though wild, has its roots in these silences. It offers explanation where history has only questions why. Did she cling so fiercely to virginity? Why did she reject every marriage proposal? Why did she guard her body as though exposure meant ruin? If Elizabeth was not truly the girl born at Greenwich in 1533, but instead a boy raised to take her place, then every choice of her life makes a grim kind of sense. Her virginity was not a symbol, but a necessity. Her independence, not a triumph, but a cage. She ruled brilliantly, yes, but she ruled while living a lie critics of the legend dismiss it as fantasy, pointing to records of Elizabeth's womanhood references by her attendants and enemies alike. Yet even these records are clouded in mystery. For in the 16th century, open discussion of a queen's body was dangerous, treasonous, at times silence, was often enforced not by choice but by fear, and the absence of proof one way or another leaves the story open like a wound that will not healing the village. Of Bisley itself, the legend was passed from one generation to the next, the story told. Of a chest found in an old manor containing the skeleton of a young girl dressed in Tudor clothing. They said it was Elizabeth, the real Elizabeth who had died as a child. It's been hidden away to conceal the terrible secret no scholar has confirmed. The tale, but it has the feel of folklore that grows from some kernel of truth, something buried too deep for history to verify, but too strong to be forgotten. Even today, visitors to Bisley hear the story whispered by guides and locals who claim that England's greatest queen may never have been a queen at all. But what if we step back from the legend and consider Elizabeth herself? Not as myth or impostor, but as a woman of flesh and blood. The truth she hid may not have been that of gender or identity, but something more human, more painful. She may have suffered from conditions that made marriage and childbirth impossible. She may have carried scars from childhood trauma that made her fear the intimacy of a man. She may have simply chosen power over love, knowing that in her world, a queen who married became the possession of her husband. In that sense, her virginity was not a secret of disguise, but of resistance, a shield she raised to keep control of her destiny. Still, the secrecy remains troubling, for even in her most trusted circles, Elizabeth revealed little. Her ladies spoke of her rages, her tenderness, her brilliance, but not of her private self. It is as though she taught them to keep her truth unspoken. Her motto was semper idem, always the same, and she lived by it fiercely, never allowing the mask to slip, never allowing the performance to falter. For more than 40 years, she played her part until it was no longer play, but reality itself. The Virgin Queen became not just her image, but her prison as her reign stretched into its final years. Elizabeth grew increasingly haunted by time. Her once radiant beauty faded, her closest companions died or betrayed her. Her beloved Dudley passed away, leaving her bereft. Her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed by her order, leaving a stain on her conscience that never washed clean. And always there was the matter of succession. With no child to inherit the throne, her dynasty would end with her, and she knew it. She spoke often of how her body belonged to England, but she also spoke of her loneliness, of her fear of death. She wandered the halls of her palace at night, restless, unable to sleep, dressed in jewels, as if clinging to the image she had created, even as it slipped away when she finally lay dying in 1603. It is said she refused to go to bed. She stood for hours silent, staring as if wrestling with memories only she could see. She whispered little, and when her attendants begged her to speak of her successor, she waved them off her body, shrank. Her voice weakened, but her secret, whatever it was, remained unspoken. Even in death, she guarded it so closely that no one could pry it loose. The Virgin Queen left the world as she had lived in mystery and silence. In control, the truth she carried went with her to the grave, leaving us with only fragments, rumors, and questions. 400 years later, we still chase those questions, hoping to pierce the veil she drew so tightly around her life. But perhaps that is her final triumph, that even in death, she rules our imagination, keeping us bound to her legend. For what is history? If not the search for hidden truths, the life of Elizabeth Tudor reminds us that even those who shape nations are human, fragile, and fearful. Sometimes the greatest legacies are built not on what is revealed, but on what is concealed. And in the end, perhaps the secret of the Virgin Queen is less about what she was hiding and more about the fact that she could hide it at all, ruling a kingdom while carrying a silence so heavy it bent the centuries themselves. The years after Elizabeth's death did not bring clarity to her story. Instead, they deepened the mystery. Her successor, James Stuart, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, inherited a throne without resistance, yet also inherited the shadow of Elizabeth's legend. The people of England mourned her as though she had been their mother. Poets wept in verse, and ambassadors across Europe wrote long dispatches about her passing. Yet, even as her reign was celebrated, her personal life remained a puzzle. The great riddle of the Virgin Queen whispered in court circles and beyond. What truth had she carried to her grave, and why had she guarded it so fiercely in the decades that followed? Rumors continued to circle, not only in England, but in the taverns and salons of Europe. Stories of her secret love for Robert Dudley, her possible children hidden away, her refusal to marry, not out of pride, but out of necessity. Some said she bore scars on her body from a childhood illness that made her unfit for marriage. Others whispered of a deformity or condition too shameful to be revealed. And then, of course, there was the wild tale of Coca Thebui, a tale that refused to die even as scholars mocked it as fantasy. It is striking that in a world eager to move forward into new monarchies and new dynasties, the memory of Elizabeth remained tied not only to her victories, but to her secrets. For many in her own time, the mystery of Elizabeth's body became inseparable from the mystery of her reign. A queen without a husband, without a child, without a family life, as most understood, it seemed almost unnatural in the 16th century. A woman who defied every expectation was bound to stir suspicion. What was she hiding? How could a woman live a life of power without yielding to the roles demanded of her? In a sense, Elizabeth forced the world to accept an answer that was both radical and unsettling: that she had chosen not to marry, that she had chosen her throne over her heart. But the human mind searches always for hidden reasons, and so her choice was interpreted as concealment, as secret, as lie. We see this hunger for explanation in the letters of foreign envoys who reported every detail of Elizabeth's life back to their kings. They wrote of her laughter, her sharp wit, her temper, her habits of dress. They described how she leaned on Dudley, how she teased her courtiers, how she danced, and how she raged. But again and again they circled back to the same question: why does she not marry? Why does she not bear an heir? In their minds, a woman could not simply choose power for its own sake. There had to be some darker truth. This tells us as much about Elizabeth's world as it does about Elizabeth herself. For, in a world where a woman's worth was measured by her womb, her refusal to use hers became a mystery to be solved, a secret to be guessed at. And so the speculation grew with every passing year, until it took on the shape of myth. The Virgin Queen became not only a title, but a question mark etched into the pages of history. The Bisley Boy legend rose again in the 19th century when Reverend Thomas Keble claimed to have uncovered proof of the tale. He insisted that the real Elizabeth had died young, and that her replacement had lived on as the monarch we know today. He pointed to Elizabeth's long neck, her sharp features, her refusal to marry, her occasional bursts of rage, as evidence. He claimed that the villagers of Bisley had long passed down the tale, and that the skeleton of a young girl discovered in a manor house there was the true princess. The story caught the imagination of Victorian audiences who loved nothing more than a scandal hidden beneath the polished surface of history. Writers seized upon it, weaving it into books and pamphlets until it spread across England and beyond. Of course, historians rushed to deny it, pointing to records that proved Elizabeth had lived since childhood. 2 eyewitnesses who described her as a girl growing into a woman, to the countless documents written in her hand. The evidence of her real identity was overwhelming, they argued, but the legend would not fade. Why? because it spoke to something deeper in us, the sense that power is never simple, that behind every crown there must be a secret that explains the cost of greatness. And yet if we strip away the rumors and focus instead on Elizabeth's own words, we find clues to a different kind of hidden truth. She often spoke of her heart belonging to no man. She described her virginity not as a gift, but as a weapon, a shield. She said she would die a virgin as she had lived, not because she could not love, but because she could not surrender. In one famous speech, she declared, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." In those words lies her truest secret. The mask she wore was not only to protect her body, but to protect her authority in a man's world she could not afford to be seen as merely a woman. She had to become something else entirely, a figure of myth, part goddess, part king, part untouchable icon. But how lonely that must have been behind the pageantry, the jeweled gowns, the speeches that stirred nations. Was a woman who spent her nights in empty chambers surrounded by silence. Her companions came and went. Her favorites betrayed her, her closest friend Dudley died, leaving her bereft. She wept for him, though she never confessed the depth of her grief. She aged alone, facing the mirror with its cruel truth, covering herself in powders and wigs, trying to preserve the image that had become her prison. Every wrinkle was an enemy, every blemish a threat to the illusion she had created. The Virgin Queen could not grow old, she had to remain eternal, and so she painted her face into permanence even as her body failed beneath the disguise. There are records of her final days when her attendants begged her to rest, when she stood for hours in silence. Unwilling to lie down for fear she might never rise again, she sat on cushions on the floor, dressed in jewels as though clinging to her crown, until, alas, her silence then was perhaps her greatest confession, for she had lived a life of silence, guarding her truth, whatever it was, from the world, and she would not break that silence, even at the edge of death. And so the question remains, was her hidden truth the tale of an impostor? Was it an illness of the body? Was it simply the choice of a woman who valued power over love? We cannot know with certainty, but we can feel the weight of it, still the power of a secret, carried so fiercely that it shaped not only a life but a nation. Elizabeth's silence created a mystery that endures for centuries later, stronger perhaps than the truth itself. For in history, as in life, the things we do not say often echo louder than the things we do. Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, left behind victories, ships, and poems, yes, but she also left behind a silence that has never been broken, and in that silence lies the secret we are still trying to uncover. The centuries rolled forward, yet the figure of Elizabeth Tudor remained fixed in the imagination of the world, her face immortalized in portraits, her speeches copied into books, her name invoked whenever England remembered its golden age. But alongside the glory, her shadow lengthened, because the image she created in life was never meant to be undone. The Virgin Queen lived not only in history, but in legend, and legends are always haunted by questions. New generations studied her reign, they marveled at her strength, how she navigated a kingdom torn by faith, how she faced down the Spanish Armada, how she walked among her soldiers, promising that though she had the body of a woman, she bore the heart of a king. Yet they returned again and again to the silence of her personal life, a queen without husband, without child, without heir. For men, that silence was threatening. For women, it was mysterious. For the world, it became the very heart of her identity, the woman who gave herself to England. And to no one else. Writers and scholars tried to pierce the mystery. Some insisted she was simply too clever to risk marriage, that she saw clearly how a husband could strip her of her independence. Others argued she was traumatized by her childhood, by the execution of her mother, by the years of fear under Mary's rule. Still others clung to the tale of imposture or deformity. Each theory revealed more about the people who told it than about Elizabeth herself, for the Victorians, obsessed with propriety, the idea of a disguised boy, explained away the scandal of a woman ruling alone. For later feminists, Elizabeth's choice to remain unmarried was seen as defiance, an act of resistance that carved out space for women in history. Each generation reshaped her truth to fit its own needs, but what of the truth itself? The truth she carried with her into the grave, perhaps we will never know. Perhaps that was her design. Elizabeth was a woman who understood the power of secrecy. She saw how mystery could become strength, how silence could be sharper than any sword. She guarded her image so carefully that even her closest companions could never pierce it. She allowed herself to be worshipped as Gloriana and the Virgin Queen because she knew the world needed symbols more than it needed facts. She let the rumors swirl because each rumor made her untouchable. Who could claim to know her when every story contradicted the last? In the confusion lay her safety, and so the hidden truth of Elizabeth may not be in whether she was an impostor or whether her body bore scars or deformities. The hidden truth may be simpler and far more human, that she lived her life in fear of losing control, fear that to marry was to surrender, fear that to bear a child was to risk death, fear that to reveal herself fully was to risk her crown. The truth may be that her virginity was not only political strategy, but personal shield, a way to survive in a world that gave women so little room to breathe. Yet, even as we consider these possibilities, the legend of the Bisley Boy remains irresistible, perhaps because it embodies our deepest suspicion about history, that the stories we are told are never the whole story, that behind every throne, every crown, every portrait lies a deception waiting to be uncovered. It is human nature to search for what has been hidden, to pull back the veil, no matter how thin, and in Elizabeth's case, the veil has never lifted, not even after 4 centuries. Her legacy, however, does not rest on her secrets alone. It rests on what she built. England emerged from her reign stronger, more unified, more confident than ever before. The navy she nurtured became the seed of an empire. The literature she patronized shaped the English language for centuries. The image of a woman ruling alone without husband or heir challenged the world's understanding of power, even as it unsettled it. She may have hidden her body, her heart, her truth, but she did not hide her brilliance. And that brilliance reshaped history. Still, the human heart longs to know not only what she did, but who she was. Was she lonely when she walked the halls of her palace at night? Was she haunted by the sound of children's laughter, knowing she would never hear her own? Was she proud of the mask she wore, or weary of its weight? Did she keep her secret in silence because it was shameful, or because it was sacred? These are questions history cannot answer, but they burn within us because they remind us that even the mightiest figures are human. Elizabeth's coffin lies in Westminster Abbey side by side with her half-sister Mary, the Queen, who once locked her away in the Tower. They lie together in silence, the Catholic and the Protestant, the bloody and the virgin. Their rivalry ended in death. Their tomb bears the inscription, partners both in throne and grave. Here in this resting place, the hidden truth of Elizabeth remains sealed as tightly as stone. Yet if we listen closely, we might hear the echo of her silence still speaking, reminding us that sometimes the greatest power lies not in what is revealed, but in what is withheld. The Virgin Queen's darkest secret, whatever it was, has outlasted the hands that tried to bury it. 400 years later, it still grips our imagination, perhaps because it forces us to confront the limits of knowledge. We cannot know every truth, no matter how we dig, no matter how we speculate. Some truths are carried away by time, locked forever in the hearts of those who live them, and maybe that is as it should be. Maybe Elizabeth wanted it this way, to remain not only a queen of her people, but a queen of mystery, ruling still over the imaginations of those who seek to understand her hand. So we are left with the story of a woman who made her body into a nation, who made her silence into a fortress, who made her life into a legend. Her hidden truth remains hidden, but her legacy remains bright. She was Elizabeth Tudor, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, a woman whose greatest secret has never been revealed and perhaps never will be. And in that silence, in that refusal to confess, lies the power that has kept her alive in history longer than any confession ever could.